Washington, D.C., the world's most powerful capital. The decisions that get made here every day change the course of history, and those decisions are mostly made by men. More than 80% of Congress and 2/3 of cabinet secretaries are men, and no woman has ever been elected president. A lot has changed in the 2 decades since I came to Washington as White House press secretary. Back then, no woman had served as Secretary of State. Now we've had 3. There were only 2 women in the United States Senate. Now there are 20. That's progress, but it's a long way from parity. So what if there were more women in positions of power in Washington and around the globe? Would it mean the end of political deadlock? Would armed conflict become less likely? And would it give us new economic hope? I've been asking some of the most powerful women in the world today, how would things change if women ruled the world? When Bill Clinton became U.S. President in 1993, I became his White House press secretary, the first woman to hold that position. Being the first woman made it harder for me to establish my authority in the male-dominated Washington culture, but I fought back, and over time, I was able to make things work better for me, and most importantly, for the president. Since that time, there have been 3 female secretaries of state, most recently, Hillary Clinton. Condoleezza Rice was the second woman to hold that post.
If I could wave a magic wand and make the world better, I would empower women, because I think you would get purchase on so many other problems. You would have women a part of the economic growth of the country. You would have women helping to create an environment in which human rights matters, and so perhaps less violence and less terrorism. You would deal with population overgrowth, because women wouldn't have 12 kids, they wouldn't have their first at 13.
If women ruled the world would be different, but in my view, it would be part of the problem that we've had when men have so much ruled the world. What I really want is a balance. I want gender balance, which is roughly 50-50 in all positions, because it's clear that women bring strengths of leadership, do things differently, are more innovative, more problem solving.
Acknowledging that men and women bring different qualities and different skills to public life is critical. For too long, women were expected to think like men and act like men if they wanted to succeed. But increasingly, their differences are seen as a source of strength rather than a weakness to be overcome.
Women should not imitate men, and that, whatever part of woman is inside yourself, you should let it develop and prosper and express itself. I'll give you an example. When I was a senior associate at Baker McKenzie and then a young partner, my 2 sons were born. And I made a point as a young partner of taking my Wednesday afternoon off to go with them to the swimming pool or to whatever activities they had on Wednesdays afternoons. And it was looked at with a bit of cynicism and skepticism by my male partners. But I thought it was important for me, it was important for my sons, and it was even more important for the other female lawyers in the firm who knew that it was okay, because if a female partner was doing it, then they could also consider daring the difference.
Today, women not only have to do their jobs as well, if not better than men, they still have to do it in a world where they're asked about their wardrobe as much as their work. Here's Ireland's first female president, Mary Robinson.
At an early stage, when I was going on a state visit, the press, both in Ireland and in the country I was going to, which was Portugal, wanted to know, what is the president going to wear? And very cleverly, my special advisor at the time, Brad Rosny, said, I'll let you know what the Irish president is going to wear if you tell me what the Portuguese president is going to wear. He was, of course, a man.
I'd actually been told by some foreign minister friends that Gaddafi had this obsession. And when we were preparing the trip, they said he kept saying he wanted to meet me in his tent. Now, I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it didn't sound good. So I said, no, tell him we'll meet in the residence as he meets all other ministers. And we'd gotten through the whole talk. It had been relatively normal, given that it was Gaddafi. And then he said, as everyone was leaving, he said, "I have a video for you." And I thought, oh no, what is this? It was a perfectly innocent little video, but it had me with Vladimir Putin, me with Hu Jintao, me with President Bush. And then it was set to music that he had written by a Libyan composer called Black Flower in the White House. So, pretty odd experience.
I did have a professor who said that colored girls should learn a trade. So I decided that I would learn a trade called physics. So you could say, well, have I always been so tough and, you know, just pushing through? And the answer is, of course not. But I tried always to lean back on what my parents taught me, what their expectations were. My father, who didn't have the opportunities that I had, and he was one who actually nurtured my math and science talents and interests. And he was the one who said, aim for the stars. So at least you can reach the treetops, but at any rate, you'll get off the ground. And his point was and is that if you don't aim high, you won't go far.
I was not born with thick skin, and so I will not kid you, there are sometimes the barbs, they hurt. They're very, you know, if they get really personal. But as you do this more and more, you do develop, I call them calluses, and I've got lots of them, as do other women in my position or in the Congress or in the governor's mansions across the country. But the plain fact of the matter is we all had to start somewhere. And there is risk involved, but there's great reward at the end.
Because my sexual harassment case, it was a sustained case, lots of witnesses who testified, but there was no disciplinary action taken against the harasser. Management didn't take any action, and then the lawsuit was filed. It got a lot of attention. And I can tell you, as difficult as all of that was, I saw a dramatic change in the culture immediately following that lawsuit. And I've seen things improve, you know, significantly over the years. So as difficult as it was something that really had to be done. And I think really changed the way that the leadership of police agencies view the way women are treated in law enforcement.
Women are more likely to be poor. They're more likely to be the primary caretakers for children, the sick, and the elderly. They're more likely to be outside the traditional power structures. That means they're also more likely to see the problems that affect people like them, the marginalized and the powerless, and to look for solutions.
Women do tend to think of the consequences. They're more likely to have an empathy with the way it's women and children in particular who have to flee for their lives, go to refugee camps, children lose their schooling. I think women are much more likely to think about that. Just as there are now studies that show that where women are ministers of health or ministers of education, the policies tend to be more likely to help poorer people in the country.
Women have brought to the table an intuitive sense of values to be translated into public policy to make life better for people in our country and in the world, and certainly in their districts. Women have brought a consensus-building attitude to the table, which is very important. It's not to put down the thinking of men. It's just to say when you have diversity at the table, you will end up with a better product.
Many women, and it's still true today, many more of them go into areas of science and engineering that are more biologically linked. Now, some would say that's because women are naturally nurturing. And it could be that they do grow up with a perspective because of how they're raised, because of what they see, that they want to do things that they feel can have an immediate impact on human health, on the improvement of the human condition.
So women still face challenges, even at the highest levels. And in the next part, we'll find out how the powerful women of today think the world would change if there were more women in power.
My hope is that there would be more peace because we bear children. And I think the thought of taking them to war is something that is more frightening to mothers than to fathers for some strange reason. My hope is that we would be more inclusive because we've been excluded for a long time.
I'm Dee Dee Myers, and I've been talking to some of the world's most powerful women here in Washington and around the world to find out what would change if there were more women in positions of power. Here in Washington, Congress is overwhelmingly male, and deadlock on a range of key issues has stalled progress. But if our political institutions were dominated by women, things could be different.
In the U.S. Congress, about the only thing that's going on across the aisle now is the women who are getting together for dinner, this women senators now. And they will cross over in their votes. Not very often, but they will do it. And it's because they have trust in each other. And that is very, very relational. I mean, they know each other's kids, you know, that's where they start, is who are you?
Raising a family, managing a home, doing all of that, being active in the community is very important. You have to be disciplined, you have to be organized, your interpersonal skills have to be developed. In terms of raising your family, you have to be a diplomat, a household engineer, whatever you want to call it, but it's a mighty task and it's hard. And multitasking and organization and discipline and focus, and yet all with a friendship in your voice, is something that is a strength for women. Sometimes men would dismiss that. That doesn't count on anybody's resume, right?
I'm pleased to announce my nomination of Dr. Condoleezza Rice to be America's Secretary of State.
For all three female secretaries of state, the issue of women's empowerment wasn't a secondary issue. It wasn't derivative of something else. It was a core issue for the State Department and for American foreign policy. And I think it's because we saw that when you have a problem with women's empowerment, you're probably dealing with a dangerous society, because this is an indication of something else. This is usually a society that doesn't value human rights in general. It's a society that's only using 50% or less of its brain power. It is a society that perhaps doesn't fully understand how to mobilize human potential.
Women have long been judged by a double standard, and sometimes it's women who don't own the value of their accomplishments.
A woman has to be unafraid to at least posit that one should be paid commensurate with what one has achieved, and should not feel embarrassed or shy about that. So people talk all the time about my being the highest paid or one of the highest paid. But that's not a point of shame, it's a point of, I would think, pride.
Here's one thing I would say about women in politics, is women in politics are too prone to saying, I'm not ready yet, I've got to study more, I've got to do this, I mean, whatever. And they're guys going, oh yeah, I'll do it. And I guess my advice would be, get in there. You can't win if you don't run. You know, part of the joy of it is the process in a way. But I would just ask women to be confident in themselves, know that they are qualified, and get in the fight.
I was growing up in segregated Birmingham, Alabama. The horizons could have been very limited. But my parents and their friends would say, you're going to have to be twice as good. Just accept it. You're going to have to be twice as good. So I grew up thinking that I had to be twice as good. And it was not a matter of debate, it was just a matter of fact. I say to everyone, my students now, you know what? It's not a bad mantra. If I walk in that room and I feel like I have prepared to the point that I'm twice as good, right, I'm not going to be lacking in confidence.
Despite the challenges, the benefits of investing in women are undeniable. Women are the engine driving global economic growth, and investing in women, it's more than just good public relations. It's a strategic imperative for companies all over the world.
When I say that the crisis might have been avoided, or certainly would have been different if there had been more Lehman sisters than only Lehman brothers, I think that women tend to have an acute sense of risks. Where are the risks? How can they be assessed? How can they be anticipated? How can they be prevented? I'm cautious about overgeneralizing, but I think it's a fact that is now more and more empirically demonstrated, that the risk-taking profile of a woman is different from that of a man. And in that sense, I think that the crisis would have been different.
I believe strongly that having women in the boardroom makes a big difference. First of all, issues get on the table that might otherwise not get on the table. I know that some of the concerns about the health effects of what corporations are doing sometimes will get on the table because the family issue will come onto the table. Workplace issues get onto the table with women who've experienced workplace issues, and now they're in the corporate boardroom and they're saying, well, you know, I know what it's like to have to manage family and work. Issues in corporations that are high-tech corporations, the question of what's happening to women in engineering and science, it'll get onto the boardroom table in that way. So I do think that many of the issues get there because you have women in the boardroom.
At least in this country, you have an economy where 50% or more of GDP growth has come from discoveries and innovations that have come out of science and technology, but from a very small group of people on a percentage basis. And so if you don't have that talent, then a society is going to stagnate. And we have many challenges that we face with energy security, you know, water, food, health, etc. And these are both national and global challenges. And so if we don't have that talent, that's a crisis.
If you provide women with, for example, the possibility of being a small entrepreneur, etc., she will not only produce, but she will give employment to other people in the community. So we see that from the economical aspect, the women's participation and equal rights produces economic positive outcomes. Or if we go to the other level, more women on boards. We have seen through the Norwegian experience after 5 years that they incorporated 40% of women on board mandatory, that those companies perform better.
Women don't just make communities more prosperous, they help to make them more peaceful. Today, 50% of peace processes fail within 5 years, in large part because women are excluded. When women are at the table, peace is much more likely to take root.
Is that you need women to participate in the peace process to make it sustainable, because first and foremost, women are often the guardians of the village, the family. They are therefore the ones who suffer most in conflict zones. They're often the target of marauding forces, the target of those who would rape and maim. And if you can engage them in the process, then they also help the society to heal.
Overall, it is fair to say that where women have equal rights, and where issues of family and children are being dealt with, you know, that is also a sign of a society that is opening up opportunity and the like, and that in and of itself cuts against the breeding ground for terrorism. It's not the only thing, but it can be a factor. And we know, unfortunately, but almost every terrorist or terrorist subject I've dealt with in the last 4.5 years happens to be male.
There was a woman in Darfur who was brought into the 6th round of the negotiations. They were stuck over where they would draw a border because they all wanted the river. And she said, that river dried up years ago. You know, she knew because she collected the water. You know, so at the most practical level, it makes a difference, but also at the level of the heart and wanting and saying, there's another way.
When it comes to the actual peace negotiations, it's usually bad men brought into hotels to talk to other bad men in front of television cameras. And you don't see women at the table. And yet the women are the ones who want to be involved.
Women are willing to do much more if they're given the chance. And in the UN, we are working on that, on trying to support women so they can develop their skills and they can be recognized as important actors, not only to prevent women from being victims of gender-based violence that happens in all those settings, but also so they can play a role as peacemakers, peace builders, because it's also in the nature of women. So I believe it will be a better world indeed. Not perfect, but a better world.
Empowering women isn't about political correctness. It's about improving outcomes. It's the right thing and the necessary thing. And because women are increasingly ruling, the world is changing for the better.
If women ruled the world, they would make sure that they weren't ruling the world.
I would say it's still a system, a patriarchal system, that don't give women the same opportunities and rights. But this can change. It can be done through policies, through laws, through mobilization of people, and particularly through political will.
I think about my 4 grandchildren who are very young now. They'll be in their 40s in 2050. And I wonder a lot about what kind of world will they share with 9 billion other people. And I think that's a thing that women are more likely to think about. And we need leaders who will think intergenerationally.
When I was visiting Iraq once, and I was having a conversation, a difficult conversation, with a very conservative Shia cleric who could not shake my hand because I was a woman. And at the end of this conversation, he said, "Would you do me a favor?" I thought, okay, what favor is that? He said, "My granddaughter is 13, and she loves you. She sees you on television. She and her mother are coming to Washington. Would you meet them?" This man and I had just had a knockdown, drag-out, awful conversation about issues like Islamic law. And so at the State Department, in comes this little girl. She's wearing a pink t-shirt, it says Princess. And she walks up to me and in perfect English says, "I want to be foreign minister too." And I thought about the look on her grandfather's face when he'd asked me to meet her. He was just beaming. And I thought maybe he saw a better world for his granddaughter than he was willing to contemplate at that moment for women. Maybe it would change him. And if you can change people like that, you'll change the world.
The bottom line is, when we accept that men and women are different, that they bring different experiences and skills and strengths to public life, when we start to value women as much as men and expand our view of leadership, only then will we be able to take advantage of all that each of us has to offer, and it's then that women will rule the world.